There's a book that's really helpful for decoding this. There's a guy, his name is Isaac Gottesman. He used to be, I found out that he's no longer there at the Iowa State University. In 2015, he wrote a book called The Critical Turn in Education. And in that book, he lays out a history of how our education system got turned to what they do now, which is called critical pedagogy. The first sentence of the book, it says, "Where did all the 60s radicals go?" And then immediately he says, "Not to the religious cults," which is weird, "not to yuppiedom, but to the classroom." And so all of the radicals from the 60s started to infiltrate according to that long march through the institution's plan. And the main place they all moved was education. If we can't change the culture directly, we're going to change the culture by changing the kids, by changing the schools. So the strategy is if you capture the colleges of education, you capture the teachers. And if you capture the teachers, you capture the students. And if you capture the students, you get the future. And so that was the long strategy that they started to employ. Well, this was kind of faltering through the 1970s. They didn't have a whole lot of success. There was a lot of kind of experimental classrooms, and in most places they didn't catch on. They didn't do very well. Then you have this one in the late 70s, this one activist, Henry Giroux. Henry Giroux is a frustrated, outright communist teacher. He's in Rhode Island at the time. He's trying to do like the talk circles in the room instead of having the desks in rows. His principal's always giving him heat for it. He gets extremely frustrated one day and he's just about to quit. He just can't stand it anymore. He has this model of education in his mind he wants to produce, and the principal won't let him do it. And I think it's Barrington, Rhode Island, a high school there. And so he had just been given a copy of a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. And so he takes this book and he, like a week before, and he reads it all one night, if you read his own description of it, he had a religious conversion experience, becomes manic. This is the answer. This tells me everything. It doesn't sleep for a couple days. He rushes back to the principal. He's like waving the book in his face. He's like, this is it. This is the vocabulary I need to be able to make my, democratic classroom or whatever it is he wants to call it. And his principal kind of shuts him down again. He ends up in grad school, I think at Boston. I always get mixed up because there's university and college. I think Boston University, but it may be Boston College. And he's in grad school. Actually, no, he's going for a professorship in the College of Education there. And he gets denied tenure right during the same week that Paulo Freire comes to visit to speak in Boston.
Is that the Brazilian philosopher?
The Brazilian philosopher is a nice way to put it. He was a Marxist. He was a Marxist education theorist. And so he strikes up a conversation with Paulo, and he goes on a mission. He called it his most important praxis, to get activists, or really Marxists, tenured in colleges of education across North America. In between the late 1970s and 1984, he successfully got over 100 faculty members tenured at different colleges of education across North America. And you have to start thinking, how many faculty of education are there? Not that many. I mean, a few thousand maybe. He got 100 personally, him alone, who pushed through into tenured faculty positions. So in 1985, Paulo Freire has a new book come out. It's called The Politics of Education. He's largely been ignored up to this point. A very favorable review was written for this book in the Harvard Education Review, and Giroux and others went kind of full tilt, sending it to the people that they had got tenured, and they started to get Paulo Freire's methods taken up in colleges of education. So that's 1984 and 5, so that Isaac Gottesman records later in the first chapter of Critical Turn in Education, he says, so that Paulo Freire arrived where he is today, which is to say everywhere in colleges of education, essentially by 1992. So through the late 1970s, through the early 1990s, the decade of the 80s in total, there is an enormous push by activists posing as teachers and as College of Education professors to get more and more of themselves in colleges of education and to adopt a very radical pedagogy movement as the basis, as like the standard for educational theory and practice. And it was extremely deliberate, so that by 1992, it would be fair to say, at least in their own estimation, that they had captured the institution of colleges of education and started to use that to produce new generations of teachers who would produce new generations of students, and be kind of a self-fulfilling cycle. You create radical teachers, they create a few radical students go to be the next group of people who want to come be radical teachers, and you end up creating basically a farm program in the colleges of education for extremely radical teachers. And that was in 92, so 30 years down the road, few generations down the road in terms of the kind of the academic turnover, you see what the result is.